Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Abicare's Listen Up podcast, and today we have the privilege of having the CEO of the Scottish Recovery Consortium, Tracey McFall, with us. Welcome, Tracey.
Oh, pleasure. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Me too, and thanks for coming along today. Okay, we'll just start off for our listeners who might not know who the SRC are. How would you describe the SRC's core mission and its lived experience approach?
SRC as an organisation's primary mission is to make sure that recovery is centrally focused in Scotland's drug and alcohol policy. So we do a lot of work at a grassroots level. So we help build recovery communities, make recovery communities sustainable. That could be supporting 6 people who are wanting to get a wee bit of support in relation to having a coffee in a small venue like a church. It's about just bringing them together, to supporting organisations who are a lot bigger in terms of being a lived experience organisation, a third sector charity, to supporting them with their constitution. So we develop that grassroots recovery community. We also do work at a government level in terms of policy. We also do a lot of learning and development, and we do a lot of work around research, just so that when we start to have discussions with government around policy, it's backed up not just by academic evidence, but it's also backed up with people with lived and living experience. So those things are really important for SRC. So we need to keep recovery on the agenda. It's so important in relation to drug and alcohol harms in Scotland.
Brilliant, and that's what we're going to go into. You've been the CEO for 2 years now at the Scottish Recovery Consortium. What drew you to that specific organisation to start with, and how has the recovery landscape changed in Scotland in the time you've been in the position?
So what drew me to SRC? I've been in the sector probably for about 30 years, and I came into the sector. I've had family issues around addiction, so that drew me into the sector. I had family members who were had harms associated with addiction, and when they were in addiction, we didn't have the services that we have now, so we had to deal with that as a family.
Yeah.
And that really gave me a fire in my belly to say, this isn't good enough. So that sent me on a journey, actually, that I've worked in residential rehab, supported women, worked in the prisons, worked with homelessness. I've always worked in this area where I can see that people need support. So I've always worked in this area. I've known SRC for a long, long time. I sat in the shadow board when it was first developed 15 years ago. And when the job came up, it was just natural that I looked at that national position and be like, look, I can give something to Scotland in terms of recovery and driving the organisation forward. So I came into this sector because I had a passion for it, and then when the SRC job came up, I thought I can give something to this in relation to my experience personally, and obviously my experience working in the sector in terms of recovery.
I think we can take a wee look at that as well, because you're an organisation who's nationwide, even the kind of remote areas of Scotland as well. I know you do lots of amazing work in. When you're thinking back, when you're speaking there about your loved ones who were in addiction, there wasn't anything there. Have we grew and developed massively in Scotland, do you feel, since those times when you seen there wasn't many?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, if you're looking back for when my family and people I know have been affected by drug and alcohol harm, we've come on leaps and bounds in some respects. I mean, I remember being in the sector where when OST, when methadone was first seen as the golden bullet, the silver bullet in relation to if people have got an issue, there's a substitute prescribing that we can support them with. And that was seen as something that was really life-changing. But what that also brought about is that also meant that for some people they were on treatment for a long, long time. Scotland has changed significantly. The difficulty we have in Scotland is it's not just heroin that we're dealing with as a drug. We are dealing with a range of different complexities, whether it be cocaine, whether it be synthetics, whether it be cannabinoids, whether it be all the drugs that we're talking about in Scotland. So yes, Scotland has changed. Yes, Scotland has invested significantly in treatment. Yes, we need treatment. We need all the different range of treatment, whether it be harm reduction, naloxone, residential rehab, drug and alcohol services. But what we also need is everything else that keeps people safe and thriving. So we also need recovery. We also need employability pathways. We also need family connections. We also need all the things in the community that make people thrive. And for me, people don't get well in systems, they get well in communities, and that's part of the work that SRC does. It's not about saying it's a either or, harm reduction, again, abstinence, against recovery, against treatment. It's about we need everything. People need choice. And in SRC, we don't care how people recover.
Yeah.
They might not even come near treatment services. We just want people to recover. And that's dead important for us. So we've got the medication assisted treatment standards now that's been a bit of a game changer in Scotland, but I wouldn't say we're there yet in terms of what that looks like. But I definitely think there's been a massive national focus on the drug and alcohol harms, and we need to continue that in Scotland.
Yeah. So you spoke a bit there about the kind of maybe the changing kind of landscape, different types of substances we're seeing here. Are we not seeing these different types of drugs in places like England, Wales, Ireland, etc.? What do you think the difference has been over the years with Scotland's kind of relationship with substances, and why do we continue to have the highest kind of drug death rates?
I mean, there's something in Scotland about the polydrug use. There's something about it's not just one drug that people are using, it's polydrug use. And actually there's also something in Scotland around how people are using in terms of that injecting. There's also something we're seeing in Scotland around the increase of cocaine use in young people. I mean, I've worked a lot in the sector, and I've worked a lot about, I've learned a lot about the historics of Scotland. And you go back to some of the work that Harry Burns has done about the de-industrialisation of Scotland, going back 40, 50 years. Some of this is decades old in relation to communities being absolutely ripped apart because those industries have been taken away from those communities. So whether that's men who've had years and years have been working in the shipyards, they've lost those jobs, have started to drink, communities have been more dispersed, there's a lack of community cohesion. So when we talk about drugs harms in Scotland, it's dead easy to talk about this in isolation, but actually there's a bigger question in Scotland what's happened over the last 40 or 50 years. We can talk about budget cuts, we can talk about the negative stuff as well in relation to the money that's and the resources that's getting into drugs and alcohol, but this is probably 4 or 5 decades. And this is what we're seeing in Scotland in relation to the ramifications of that. Intergenerational trauma, poverty. Yeah. It is such a driver. And that's maybe one of the frustrating things when we talk about drugs and alcohol in Scotland, is actually drug and alcohol, the harm is really important. But what is driving that? It's poverty. Yeah. And inequality, stigma. So all those things are really important, and we can't talk about drugs and alcohol without talking about those broader societal questions, for me anyway, in terms of SRC. Yeah.
So it's a great point you make there as well, and it's something that I've really looked into myself. You know, it kind of ties in with the Glasgow effect and things like that, doesn't it? Are we putting things in place to really address those underlying issues, or are we still focusing on the substance itself?
I'm going to be dead honest, and the answer for me is probably no. I mean, I think we can continue to treat the treatment, the symptom, the treatment, but and use treatment to do that. But my own personal experience in relation to underlying trauma is I couldn't move on until I dealt with my trauma. Yeah. And the difficulty we have in Scotland is there is a lack of psychologists, psychiatrists that underpinning trauma-focused work that needs to be done. And I don't think COVID has helped in this space either, actually, because what's happened is treatment is one element. People come into a treatment service, they get support, they maybe get a prescription, but actually, where is the underlying CBT solution-focused trauma work that sits underneath that? And that's no, I'm not here to ditch our colleagues in treatment services in the third sector, because I know how hard they work. But we're all under a bit of pressure in terms of the system feels quite stretched. Yeah. And it's really difficult if there's numbers coming through your door, having worked in residential rehab and a load of different treatment services. I know the numbers are coming through your door. There's less time to get into that. Well, Eddie, how are you feeling today? What tools have you got to support yourself, rather than actually, I've got 40 clients to see today, there's your script, I'll see you later and I'll see you in 8 weeks. Yeah. So we need to get underneath some of these issues in relation to the trauma that people face. And most people, generalisation, but most people I've worked with and the evidence base would tell you whether you're in prison or in community, if you have issues around drug and alcohol related harm, it is usually associated with some sort of trauma.
Yeah. And I heard a great saying once, if you didn't have trauma before your addiction,
You're going to have trauma
addiction
now.
itself causes that trauma. So it really is an error. So on that kind of note, what's the biggest hurdles you see that we're facing in 2026 regarding getting the right help and the right support out to people with addiction issues?
There's probably loads of things. There's probably loads of things we can do. I think we need to sometimes accept that not everybody comes through treatment, right? So I think there's something that we need to do in Scotland as a society, as leaders, as politicians, is to start to recognise that actually treatment is one option, but it's not the only option. So we've got AA, CA, NA, mutual aid, smart recovery. We've got a range of different options and choices for folk that I don't think we take advantage of in terms of Scotland. So how are we connecting up that treatment system or the court system or the third sector community systems with actually what is a free resource, having hundreds, probably thousands of meetings in Scotland on a day-to-day basis. So there's something around trying to expand our thoughts about this isn't just about treatment, this is about the other things that people need, although treatment's dead important. I think we need to be dead honest with ourselves and start to think about how we challenge stigma.
Yeah.
People are stigmatised, they tend not to come into treatment. So the workforce has got a lot to do with that. And again, I'm no ditching the workforce because I know how busy they are, but I think there's loads of evaluations that's come up recently through the work in the National Mission in Public Health Scotland about actually the stigma that people face coming into services. So there's something around stigma, but not just stigma that people feel, institutional stigma in relation to that. So there's something we really need to challenge about stigma, and there's also something we need to do in Scotland around giving people information that they've got rights to access support. And that knowledge is gold dust. But what is dead difficult is if you're chaotically using, you go to a treatment service, you don't get supported the way you should, they're asking you to wait, they're asking you can't get access to residential rehab. If I'm using 4 times a day injecting into my groin, I'm not going to go to a lawyer and challenge the system to say you're affecting, I'm not getting my rights met. So you need to meet people where they're at. You need to be accessing independent advocacy. You need to be making sure that people understand their rights. And that, I think those rights give people the knowledge, and it actually helps people access the treatment that they get. We need to be challenging the big systems. And again, it's not about ditching what's right or wrong, but we know things aren't right in terms of stigma, in terms of treatment services, and that's a fact.
And maybe come back to the kind of scale of our kind of drug deaths here in Scotland, and obviously there's a lot of talk now of kind of alcohol as well, isn't there? Join that up as well. What type of people from what areas? Is there a pattern to the people that's at highest risk for these drug overdose?
Well, what we know in Scotland is, and I hate this language, but we still call it the ageing cohort. So we know people who are using for 15, 20, 25 years, they are more at risk of dying in relation to drug-related deaths. And that's for a number of different reasons. That's because they're at higher risk, but actually it's also about the added physical complications that they can have in their body because they've been using so long. So there's excuse the language here, the ageing cohort, those people that we probably know that have been using for 20, 25 years. So there's a risk there, but there's also risk coming through around young people, ketamine use. And if we don't get a grip of that as a society and as a country, from an early intervention point of view, early intervention and prevention point of view, we're going to see another tsunami of young people coming through the system. So there's the one end where you've got an ageing cohort who've been using for a long, long time, who are physically in a place where it's really difficult in relation to drug use, and that's creating drug-related deaths in relation to the ageing cohort. But you also have young people coming through using different kinds of drugs, using your ketamine, using your cocaine. And in the middle of this, you've also got women who need different things when it comes to recovery. And what we know about women is they tend to come into addiction later, but they get harmed quicker.
Yeah.
So it's a kaleidoscope effect, they call it. They come into addiction for different reasons than men. They tend to come in later on in life, but they get harmed quicker. And actually they tend to commit addiction for different reasons as well. So there's a range of different populations, and excuse my language, but there's a range of different populations. And listen, we've not even talked about alcohol-related deaths because they're higher than drug-related deaths. So there's a big question in society around how we deal with that.
Yeah. So it was last year the SRC put on an excellent event up in Perth.
Yep.
And you had David Best there.
Yep.
And he speaks a lot about kind of CHIME's model, doesn't he? Could you speak a wee bit about that and how that we maybe implement that more in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I've coming into the SRC, been in there for a couple of years, was really an opportunity, and this is something that we'd not done in Scotland for a long, long time. And in many respects, again, not being critical, but in many respects because we've focused so heavily on treatment and on the MAT standards for the right reasons. Yeah. There's been less focus on recovery and the importance of recovery. So one of the things that we did in SRC and we've been doing over the last couple of years is really just to raise those conversations about how important recovery is as part of that treatment pathway or not if people don't come through treatment. So we brought a range of people together in Perth last year, whether it was about a couple of hundred people there. So we brought academics together, we brought research together, we brought practitioners together, we brought lived experience recovery communities and leaders to really start to talk about what we need in recovery in Scotland. And one of the things that's been really important, David Best says it, you need someone to love, somewhere to live and something to do. And as you get them in place, you've got more chance of people getting recovery. And CHIME is an approach that's really, really important to that. So it's about connection. It's about making people feel connected, whether that's to their communities, their families. It's about hope, and that's something that I think we're getting there now in Scotland, but I think, see, because drug deaths are really quite negative, it's really political. We hear it all the time. And actually, there was a meeting just yesterday, and they were talking about how can we raise people's hope to say, actually, you might be in addiction right now, but there's hope that you can get out of addiction. And if you don't give people hope, I mean, what chance have we got as a society? And actually, hope doesn't cost you a penny. Yeah, it's about just how you relate to somebody to say, I've been where you've been. But there's something else if you want that. Okay. Identity is a really important part of CHIME, because what that does is it's when people start to get that sense of recovery, their identity changes. They're not a person in addiction. They're a person that's got different aspirations in life. And then you've got meaning, which is a part of CHIME, and that's about a different meaning that you have in your life, but also a different meaning around what you can give back. And then you've got empowerment. People start to get recovery. Their shoulders go up. They get a wee bit more self-confident. And actually, and you'll know this for the work that you do, how just that bit of empowerment, that bit of, I can do this, or I've made a different decision, it just completely changes people's perspective. So if we can start to incorporate some of the CHIME work, and we're doing that in our work, it's just about that basic connection. I mean, see, for me, fundamentally, and I think this is something that's been lost, I think, we're really trying to do work in this in SRC, is when I worked in addiction services and when I had caseloads and things like that, we had loads of time to get to know somebody, right? So if I had an addiction or got addiction, I come into a service, what's dead important is that I trust my worker. Yeah. I've got a relationship with that worker. And see, for me, particularly around the COVID space, it's not really helped, is we've lost a bit of that, getting that relationship, getting that trust. If I trust you, then I'm more likely to be going like, Eddie, I lapsed yesterday. Yeah. And I'm really struggling today. And I think we've got something that we need to do in Scotland, is really getting back to basics. What do we know what works? A relational approach works to behaviour change. And I think we've kind of lost that over the last few years. It's all about getting people into treatment, which is fine. But actually, getting people into treatment is only one thing. You need to build trust with your worker. You actually, going back to the stuff that you talked about, to start to talk about your trauma. So for me, SRC's had a massive piece of work to do to just start to have those conversations about connection, hope, identity, meaning, empowerment. Some of this stuff isn't rocket science, believe it or not, although we're dealing with some really complex issues around drug deaths and alcohol deaths. But some of this is about getting back to basics, I think, and that's some of the stuff that SRC are doing. That's the stuff we talked about in the conference. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I have to say that was probably the best conference I'd been to, you know, for all the different kind of groups and different services there. There was a real, sometimes you speak about that kind of connection and power in a room, you know. It was an amazing day.
The energy was good.
Everybody that kind of went along to it as well that I spoke to, you know, and I think that kind of leads us on to what I was what I kind of speak about next regarding there is so much good work, so many good workers, so many good services, so many people getting help. There's probably more people getting into recovery now than there's ever been before.
100%.
But we can get caught up in the other side of which is very important as well. But what do you see when you look out? And obviously the SRC is at the core of that. In Scotland, there's a lot of grassroots services popping up. There's a lot of people getting supported. Is that what you're experiencing as well when you look around?
Oh man, we connect with recovery communities and leaders right across the country, right? And what they're telling us and what we're hearing is, if it wasn't for the work of recovery communities, lived experience organisations, drug-related deaths would be higher. Yeah. And some people might challenge me and say, well, Tracey, that's anecdotal. But I know the work that's happening across the country. So we done a wee bit of work about 18 months ago. We done a bit of a national baseline just to get a sense of what LEROs needed for SRC and what was out there. And what we found is and we've got the figures and the stats to back this up, there is thousands of volunteers delivering thousands of hours to thousands of people across Scotland. Unpaid. Yeah. And I think that for me was really key to learn, because, and this is some of the stuff that we've been really banging the drum about, so we probably don't value enough the thousands of people that have been through addiction, that want to give something back, that are busting a gut at a community level to support people. So the likes of some of the stories we've heard and the work that I'm involved in, right, okay, so we've not seen John for a couple of days. Is he all right? I wonder if he's all right. Let's go and chap his door to make sure he's all right. Amazing. That local intelligence, I suppose, and that's the spirit that comes from people that have came through addiction and understanding the local community, because they will go and chap the door. Yeah. And I speak to loads of people like that, Tracey, it feels 24/7 sometimes, but actually we've got a responsibility to make sure people are safe in the community. And behind that door, when they've chapped it and John's come out and he's like, I'm really struggling today, well, do you know what, get your jacket on, we've got the cafe on Saturday, or we've got a cafe, come down for a cup of tea and a bite to eat. It's that kind of stuff that people don't see in Scotland. I
think you spoke about it, it's not always rocket science, is it? It's the simplest of things, it's the simplest of gestures, you know, and I think it's really important that we speak this up as well, isn't it? And let people know how well people are doing, how well services are developing. Volunteers are at the core of all these services across Scotland, you know, and they understand because they've got that lived experience as well, what might be going on and stuff.
And that's what we need to make sure of, and that's SRC's role, is to make sure that we continue to remind our services, remind our alcohol and drugs partnerships, remind our Scottish Government, remind anybody who will listen that actually there is thousands of people in Scotland supporting people in addiction right now that potentially haven't come through treatment. And I think that's so important, because actually we'd probably not give them enough credit over the last few years, and that's something that SRC are really keen to make sure that they get the credit, because if it wasn't for the volunteers across all these communities, people would be struggling even more. So for me, it's making sure that they get all the credit they deserve and the value, and actually should be getting the funding. But hey, that's another issue.
Okay, so the Scottish Government recently launched the Alcohol and Drugs Strategic Plan, didn't they, for the next 10 years?
Yes.
What's your initial thoughts on that, and is it ambitious enough for what we're dealing with at the moment in Scotland?
It's good to see recovery embedded in that. SRC have done a lot of work. We done a lot of consultation in relation to that strategy to make sure that recovery was included in that. So we spent probably 9 months speaking to recovery communities, speaking to people with living and lived experience to ensure that their voices could be felt in that strategy and they could see themselves in that strategy. So we are really, really, we're really happy that recovery has been central to that strategy. Prevention is in it. Prevention and early intervention is absolutely critical, because actually what we need to do is get upstream.
Yeah.
Waiting till people are in crisis, actually, one, costs us more money. It creates absolute devastation to individuals, families and communities, and actually increases risk of death. So we need to get upstream in terms of that early intervention piece. And I mean with children, young people and communities, and you'll know this with some of the work that you're doing, Eddie. So it was really good to see that in it. Harm reduction's in it. Absolutely. No everybody will want to come into treatment. No everybody's at a place where they want to change their behaviour, but if we've got access to harm reduction, then we're keeping people alive, which is absolutely critical. But one of the biggest things for me in it was probably that wider circle of support, because actually without the wider circle of support, people won't get to thrive in that recovery space, and that's really, really important for me. So that for me is recovery is a huge element in it, but it's that wider circle of support, and I don't just mean within addiction. I mean housing, justice, mental health services, domestic violence. This is about a whole system we need to be looking at here, and the more we continue to look at drugs and alcohol in isolation, the more we're taking our eye off the ball in relation to that. So it was really good to see the strategy thinking about, well, actually, the same people in prison are the same people that are going to come out and live in our community. So that whole system approach was really, really important for me. And what is also, which has been dead interesting and really good for the strategy, is we're starting to tie it in to other national strategies. So we've got the National Population Framework. So this drug and alcohol related harm is not just a drug and alcohol issue, it's a population issue. Yeah. It's a public health issue. So it was really good to see that the government are trying to join the dots at a strategic level across different policy areas, because this is about communities at the end of the day. So that was good. So loads of things in it, but for me what was massively important was to make sure that recovery stays absolutely central to the strategy, because we want to get people thriving. Yeah. Yep.
I think quite important what you speak there. The SRC have done a lot of work in the prisons over the years as well, and we're seeing a lot of kind of recovery cafes and recovery support within prisons nowadays. There was a launch of the Prison-to-Rehab scheme, etc., etc. Are we seeing a difference being made inside prisons and when people are leaving prisons and engaging with the recovery supports in communities?
SRC have been working in prisons probably for the last 2 and a bit years. So we are in every prison in Scotland trying to create a culture where recovery is possible. So that means we work alongside the prison staff to try and create the space for recovery. We train the prison staff in relation to what recovery is. We actually train the residents in prison, and we take them through a bit of a journey in relation to, well, actually, are you wanting recovery? Have you thought about recovery? What does that mean for you? So we take them through a range of training, learning, development opportunities, and also we'll give them the opportunity to take them through peer support. So actually, once they're through that, or once they've started that recovery journey, they can actually use those skills to support other people within prisons. But we're not going to no recognise the pressures that prisons are under in terms of populations. And SPS have done, they've created a new strategy, and what I've seen, and again, because I've been in the sector for so long, 10 years ago, Scottish Prison Service probably wouldn't have mentioned the word recovery. No. And I suppose that's where we've came in Scotland. We have came a long way. The fact that SPS have got a strategy with recovery is at the centre of their drug and alcohol strategy tells you where we've came in Scotland. Last year at the Recovery Walk, Scottish Prison Service had representation at that walk from every prison in Scotland. That's light years away from where we used to be in Scotland, so we need to take the positives in that. SRC are doing a power of work. There's loads of lived experience organisations that are doing a power of work in prison. what we need to make sure is when people leave prison, they transition into that recovery space. I think residential rehab's been, and it's not for everybody, because people want to leave prison. The last thing they want to do is go into a residential rehab for another 3 to 6 months. But actually, people who've started that recovery journey in prison, it's not finished. So they should get that opportunity to go into that deep stuff, the trauma work through residential rehab. So that's been a game changer. And I think, again, that's another indication of us as a society and as a nation recognising that actually just because you leave the prison gates, it doesn't mean to say your recovery or you're healed, your recovery is going to continue. But there is a lot of pressure in the prisons in relation to space, capacity, and we know there's issues around prison about the drugs that people are using. But if we take that opportunity when people are in prison to start to have that conversation, it's a no-brainer for us. And again, a shout out to all the Leros, the Ciscos, the Minds of Recovery, the work that all the Leros are doing in prisons, and they are really trying to work really hard to support people as best as they can within prisons, and then connect them as they come back out. And
even if it's just at that stage of planting that seed, that there is
100%.
support out there, it can never be a waste of time, can it?
Yeah, 100%. We had done some work. We gave evidence to the Justice Committee. The Scottish Parliament had done a inquiry into substance misuse in prison, and the Scottish Parliament had asked us to pull people together who've got the experience within prison, and the members of that committee sat down with those people and talked to them. And again, that's just, and you might think, well, why would they not do that? But 5 years ago, that would never have happened in a Justice Committee. So again, it's no perfect. We don't get it right all the time, but I do think we're trying to listen as a nation, as a society, as a parliament, to say, how can we get this right? And I suppose for me, if people keep saying we need to have lived experience at the centre, then we need to have lived experience at the centre, and that's a big thing for SRC. Don't say you want lived experience at the centre if you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it authentically. So again, that's just another indication, particularly around the prison space, that they are trying to get the insights of what it's truly like for people. Because if you've never been in prison, you don't know what it's like. And it's all right, us in our ivory tower sitting back going, oh, that might work. Well, actually, you need to speak to the people who've been through that process, and they're readily happy to give that experience. So some of the work in the justice system has been really good. But it is a bit of it is pressurised, I'm not going to lie, in terms of that space and just capacity and demand.
Yeah. So the SRC's done significant work with the right to recovery.
Yeah.
Why is it important to frame addiction and recovery through the lens of human rights?
Well, all of us have rights, and it's not until you actually start to work alongside the people and you actually tell them, do you know, you've got rights to access treatment and support, and they're like, have I got rights? But again, it's the last thing you think about if you're in addiction, injected into your groin 6 times a day. You're like, who am I to have rights? I'm a nobody. And I suppose that's some of the stuff that Tom and the team has been working. We've got an allocated worker, Tom Bennett, who does a lot of work with Leros organisations to help them understand that actually you have got rights in this space. And that might just mean that it's really basic in terms of you understand what your rights are, or you start to understand what the complaints process is. So rights is fundamental for me, but the difficulty with some of the right stuff is we need to make sure that there's 2 things in this. So we've got duty bearers who are responsible for making sure that people get access to their rights, but sometimes those systems can be quite hard to challenge an NHS system. And again, I'm picking the NHS, and I'm not being picked that because I'm critical of colleagues in the NHS. But again, when you're Joe Bloggs in a really vulnerable place, the last thing you think you have is get power to challenge the NHS system. But I think the more that we can get out there in terms of people understanding their rights, the more we can galvanise that. And I think that's really, really important. But we need 2 things. We need grassroots up. We need people to understand their rights, but we also need the systems, the duty bearers, to start making sure that those rights are exercised. Because in terms of legal frameworks, child protection, there's masses of there's masses of rights around and legislation around child protection, sex offenders, MAPA, all that kind of stuff. And what we're finding in Scotland, because of some of the budget cuts, is some of those big systems have defaulted in, well, we're only going to cover our statutory duties and our statutory responsibilities. And that's why it's important that hopefully in the next Parliament we'll see the introduction of the Scottish Human Rights Bill, which will give us a wee bit more power in relation to exercising the rights for people with drugs and alcohol issues and families.
Yeah, I know it might be quite a generalised question, but often after this podcast we'll get messages on our social media, how do I go about accessing this? And what I've kind of experienced over the years is in different areas of Scotland that looks very different. Is this going to bring everything together so people are pretty clear on... most common question is, I'm addicted to opiates, I'm addicted to alcohol, I want to get into treatment, where do I go and what do I ask for? Do you feel that this is it's a fair kind of deal that everybody gets in different areas, or does that look too different over the years?
I'm not going to lie, I think it's still variable across the country. And some of that's for really valid reasons. If you look at really rural and remote areas, it doesn't really matter what the medication assisted treatment standard says, because if you live in an island in Scotland, you're probably not going to get access to treatment the next day, right? So we need to be realistic in relation to how we deliver the medication assisted treatment standards, and what that looks like geographically across the country. What's the most important thing for me is people get the information they need and get access to the treatment when they need it for as long as they need it. You'll probably get more of a chance to access treatment quicker in a big city than you would in the north of Scotland. And I don't want to obviously mention any areas, but in rural areas. So I think it's still variable. Is there a centralised place where people can say, right, I need access to treatment, where do I get that access to treatment? Again, you'll probably find that information in a range of different places. But if anybody needs any access to treatment, the first place I would probably go to is probably the local Alcohol and Drugs Partnership website, or the local any mutual aid group. And again, if there's anything that SRC can do to point them in that direction, then we certainly will. But still variable across the country. And there's no a centralised place for this information, but you should be able to access local information about local treatment services in your local area.
Yeah. Okay, stigma remains a massive barrier for people seeking help. How is the SRC working to rewrite the media and change the public narrative around people who use substances?
Stigma's massive at a range of different levels, whether it's, people we know and people we work with actually can self-stigmatise because they're in that addiction space. We know that there's institutional stigma, and that's just the facts in relation to that. There's community stigma, there's stigma within families in relation to people who use alcohol and drugs. So SRC do a lot of work around this stigma space in a range of different ways through our training, our learning and development. But I suppose one of the biggest things that we do on a national level is obviously the recovery walk. I mean, walking through Stirling with 2,000 people, walking through the city centre when people are in Greg's stop and having a chat. There's no other way that you could actually galvanise and challenge stigma in relation to recovery. So, and we're really proud of the fact that we had the recovery walk last year in Stirling, and we walked right through the city centre. So I think we've all got a responsibility though when it comes to stigma, and that's about making sure that we check in our own unconscious bias and our own stigma. So I can do that on an individual basis. I do that within our team. We need to do that within our own organisations, but we need to call out stigma when we see it, and we need to challenge stigma. So we're going to continue to do a huge amount of work. We're going to develop some courses around stigma, so we can see there's a massive space for this. But for me, the recovery walk is one of the best ways that we can actually challenge that public perception around stigma, and actually people recover. I mean, it's like, and it goes back to that negative narrative we can sometimes have in Scotland about drug deaths, and it's horrendous what's happening. But there's so much good stuff happening that we just don't focus on. And I think if we balance and reframe some of that, I think that would really help us in Scotland to kind of depoliticise it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's important we speak about that as well, because over the years, a lot of addiction recovery focus, maybe events and stuff, have always been contained in the recovery addiction community, hasn't it? And I think the Recovery Walk, which is probably Scotland's biggest recovery event, celebration of recovery, certainly out in the public and stuff like that as well, and one of the most well attended and fun days.
That's awesome.
I've never really seen the public not take to it as well when you were walking through the streets of Edinburgh, Dundee, awesome, or whatever. It's always been very supportive, and it's just like we need to overcome our own stigma, people in recovery as well. Do you feel that? Do you feel that's fair to say? Because
100%. Yeah. But I suppose these conversations help, don't they? Getting in a room and having these conversations is really, really important. Being on the Recovery Walk, I mean, we evaluated the Recovery Walk last year, and so we've got people who have never been on a walk before, and it was their first walk, and they said, this is the first time I've actually connected with a recovery community out with my area, to people who've been in recovery and they've been at their 10th walk, and they're like, this is absolutely awesome, and I've still managed to connect. And the beauty about the Recovery Walk is it brings together families, it brings together people at early stage of recovery, it brings people together that are not in recovery, that are still in treatment and are still using. And for me, what's dead important is actually it brings together the services as well that are supporting people in that. So for me, it's an absolute no-brainer in relation to creating that space. And actually, what people get out of that is so different depending on where they are in their own recovery. And sometimes it's important just to have a bit of fun. And to have a burger and to have the wains running about in relation to the fairgrounds, and just creating that bit of space. In the last 2 years it's rained, so we've all ended up dancing in the rain, which has been phenomenal, but I have never had a bad experience at a Recovery Walk. And even before I took this role, and I've been at several Recovery Walks, never had a bad experience, and the feedback has always been absolutely awesome. We don't know what the future of the Recovery Walk is going to be, just in terms of what the funding looks like, but we are trying really, really hard to make sure that the event takes place this year, and we'll keep pushing for that because it's so important. It
has to go ahead, because like you're saying there, it's one of the few events in Scotland where everybody can come together. People travel from all over for it, every event. There's a build-up all year, even in our service at Abbey Care for Recovery Month, where clients are asking it when it is, because that's a real time for them to come back and meet up with people they've maybe been in treatment with and stuff, and it'd be such a shame if an event with that magnitude.
It really helps galvanise, I suppose, us as a nation, just to make sure that we're celebrating that. And as I said before, last year was the first time that every prison was represented. So people in prison that are being supported by SPS to come to that Recovery Walk, to be proud that they're in recovery even though they're in prison, it blows me away, absolutely blows me away.
And it isn't even kind of written down about the amount of people that's maybe just came and experienced that for the first time, 100%. Maybe struggling, that's came into recovery because that,
100%.
So, okay, can you tell us about some of the grassroots projects SRC is supporting right now that are really making a difference on the ground?
So Fiona and our team supports small lived experience recovery organisations. So she's done a lot of that across the country, whether it be Sandra Holmes' Families Campaign for Change. She's Midlothian family. She's got a wee Midlothian family group. So Fiona supported her to access some funding for Cohort so that she can expand the reach of the family group. So Fiona's doing a lot of work with grassroots organisations who don't need a lot of money, but need a wee bit of money so they can hire a venue, do a bit of training for their members, buy teas and coffees. Again, a lot of this is really no rocket science. A lot of the groups that we support don't want to be constituted. They just want to get together. They just want to get together and support one another. So the work that Fiona's doing at grassroots level, particularly around the Midlothian family group, has been awesome, and they've got a wee bit of Cohort funding. Fiona's supporting them through that evaluation process and application process, etc. So there's the really grassroots stuff. We're also doing some work with Harbour, in Ayrshire and Eacher. You'll know Steph McCutcheon and Eddie Gorman quite well. And those organisations, both organisations have grown quite a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, which is brilliant. But what we've identified working alongside them is actually they've grown, which is amazing. They've got additional funding, which is amazing. But what we need to make sure is, as those organisations grow, they have the foundation and the infrastructure to make sure that they can support that growth. So we've done a bit of work with Harbour over the last 14 months to help them develop their organisational strategy. And strategy sounds really quite boring for folk, but a strategy is just something that you can put in place to make sure you understand where the organisation's going. And you've got the foundations to keep that growth supported and the foundations in place. So we've done that with Eddie and his team over the last 14 months. It included the board, it included people that support our volunteers and Eddie. So we're in the process of writing all that up, and we're going to be doing an online event just so we can share that with other Leros. And again, we'll develop some guidance, and SRC can support in that process. So we've done that work with Harbour. We're just about to start that with Eacher, with Steph McCutcheon and his team. And again, that's just to help him make sure that they've got the foundations in place so their organisation's sustainable. So there's a range of different things we've done across the country, from grassroots learning and development. We're doing lots of work in East Renfrewshire. We're doing lots of work in Inverclyde with recovery communities. Amazing. And some of that might just be helping them identify what they need in terms of recovery support. It might actually just be creating a bit of space and training so they can start to think about, well, what is recovery? What's recovery for you? What's the pathways into recovery? What does recovery mean? And then we're also developing we developed the Recovery College. It's like an 8-day course that was SRC delivered it a long time ago, but we've brought it back in. We've delivered that a couple of times last year. We're in the process of reviewing that, so we're going to be delivering the Recovery College again. Brilliant. And that's for people, leaders in the sector, like the John McCanns, your Eddies, your Stephs, your other Steph, all the leaders in recovery that have been through that process, that are new leaders. The Recovery College is what set them on their journey in terms of getting the fire in their belly in relation to that local activism. So we really don't want to lose that. So we're going to be looking at delivering Recovery College in the next 6 months again in another couple of areas in Scotland. So watch this space.
Brilliant. It's great work, Tracey, you do. And the time runs away with us. So for someone listening who's in early recovery and feels maybe isolated, what resources or networks does SRC offer to help them people get out there and find their tribe?
Well, ultimately, you can get in touch with SRC, and I can make sure that you've got those information. We would always want to point people in the right direction. Speak to your local, if you've got a local network, a local recovery network. If you don't know anybody in recovery and you want to get into recovery, Google your local recovery communities. There's a resource called Alice, and I can give you the links. And all you need to do is put recovery into it, and it'll bring up every single recovery meeting in the whole of Scotland. If you put in recovery in your area, it'll break that down for you. So there is loads of things out there. It's just about making sure that people get access to the one place so they can find out where that is. You're always going to be able to find an AA, NA, CA meeting. It's not everybody's way to get into recovery, but there is always meetings everywhere across the country every day, and you'll always get a recovery community doing something, whether it be arts and crafts, or whether it just opening doors for people to get a bite to eat, or else coming in today specifically training around recovery. There's always something in your local area. Get in touch with SRC if you need any support with that, or use the Alice tool, put in recovery in the area that you're at, and you'll definitely find something.
Thanks, Tracey. And the final question, we spoke about it earlier, I'll give you a heads up for it. So we always get our guests come on the show, and just to find a wee bit about them as well. So you want to name a significant song in your life and tell us the reasons why? Not particularly your favourite piece of music, but a really significant song in your life.
There's so many. I'll get so many bits of music depending on the stage of my life. But I suppose the game changer for me is Alison Moyet. The first time, I was going to sing it there, but I thought I'm not a very good singer. The first time I saw your face, absolutely amazing tune, and that for me is a song I'll always remember when my son was born.
Okay.
Game changer. Changed my life, my son being born. I don't know why I get emotional, but it was an absolute game changer for me. So that song brings back so many memories because it's just a point in my life where there was just a pivotal change.
Yeah.
And that was because I had a wee thing to look after, you know, and it was an absolute game changer for me. And he's awesome. He's 25 now, and he's just had a wee baby about 8 months ago. So I'm a gran.
Oh, congratulations.
So I could give you another
Granny.
song in relation to that. I know.
Yep.
So there's been loads of bits of music throughout my life where I've thought, yep. But I suppose the most pivotal one would be that one, because it just changed my life for the good. And he's absolutely awesome, and I love him to bits.
Oh, thank you, Tracey. Thank you so much for being
you're
an
so
amazing
welcome.
guest
It was
today,
awesome.
Tracey, and coming on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.